I personally think some of that stuff gets really hard because our cars are our personal space. And again, to these folks that talk about vehicles being sitting in a parking lot or in a driveway 95, 96% of the time being unused, I think are misunderstanding completely the idea of usage. That vehicle sitting in my driveway or in my garage has got my golf clubs, my child safety seat, my trash, whatever, baseball stuff, hockey stuff. It's being used. Maybe
Right.
it's not moving, but it's being used. And
Yeah.
it's there, sitting there at my convenience. So I think we have a long ways to go before we as a society move away from that kind of a convenience-based shopping or ownership.
I think a lot of people share that sentiment. The drive time of it is minimal, but
Right.
but the utility of that drive time is maximum.
Right.
Hey, we got a good show lined up for you today.
20 years into the internet for the auto industry.
To me, that's the biggest change in what's going on.
So let's take that. I mean, there's a narrative that's being pushed by a group of folks about the dealership franchise model. I think if I recall, was it Bob Lutz predicted in a big editorial with Auto News that I want to say as little as 5 years, but maybe as many as 20, the dealership 20 would cease to exist. In our conversations, you disagree. You think that the model is strong, and it's not about sustaining. It's about evolving with the changes. Maybe you could speak to that on what your position, kind of what your position is. What's the strength of the model, and why will it not only endure but prosper?
I think we've seen in our industry through the years, disruptors have come in at various points, and no one's really disrupted this space in terms of taking it over. Calling CarSaver a disruptor because of its partnership with Walmart. I think that's more of I don't think that's so much a disruption, it's more as an evolution for dealers.
When I think of disruption, I think of the horse and buggy era got disrupted.
Right. Yes, correct. The reason that the model, I think, is strong, when I say strong, I think can defend itself against a lot of these so-called disruptors, are because of the unique dynamics in the space. We're dealing with a $30-some thousand purchase. That's a complicated transaction. We're not talking shoes or books or food or clothes here. We're talking about a complicated transaction that requires significant financing from a large, well-capitalized bank. We're talking about a transaction that is regulated heavily. We're talking about a transaction that typically requires a trade. There's a lot to it, and it's hard, I think, to say that some of these outsiders are going to be able to come in and do away with that model is, I think, not fully understanding or appreciating the dynamics of the industry.
Now, you get companies, I'll use Carvana as an example.
Sure.
If you look at their commercials, they're emphasizing, oh, the dealers are bad and you should buy a car from our vending machine and not deal with the dealer. But they're a dealer as well. So there's nothing disruptive about Carvana.
And they're becoming more like a traditional dealer every day.
Yeah. And if Carvana is going to succeed, it's going to have to adopt the things that dealers bring that dealers offer their customers.
Right. Now, there may be some things we can learn from Carvana. I would say there's probably going to be a lot of things Carvana learns from the dealership model.
Mm-hmm. You wrote a piece, Cliff, titled "The Auto Industry Enters Era of Uncertainty." And in that piece, what you put out is that over the last 100 or so years, 5 fundamental aspects in the industry have stayed the same.
What I believe is over the next 3 to 5 years, and then we're going to start getting some more clarity to this uncertainty. And I think that the connected car is going to provide the most disruption in the short term. Manufacturers are going to have insight and access to the customer that they've never had before.
that's going to open up a Pandora's box if we get into data, which I'd love to have you back on a separate episode specifically about data. So when we talk about ownership, we have to distinguish, are we talking about personal ownership? Because somebody's going to always own the vehicles.
Yeah, I define it this way, Ryan. I would say, because certainly we have subscription-based models, we have leasing. I would say that ownership in terms of I, as the customer, have a level of control over that vehicle. It's in my garage, it's in my driveway for a period of time. Now, maybe I'll swap those out every couple of weeks, but there's still some element of owning that vehicle.
Sure.
I'm not waiting for an autonomous vehicle or a pod to show up in my driveway. I'm not waiting 5-10 minutes for one to show up in my driveway because I don't have a vehicle. If you think about when Uber and Lyft started, and much of and I was hitting a lot of these Silicon Valley conferences and mobility conferences, and the conversation seemed to be really focused on the fact that the idea of private ownership would start being reduced because of Uber and Lyft and some of these companies. The fact is, the last 2 years, personal ownership, private ownership is going up. In fact, the number of households with with more than one car is going up significantly over the last 2 years. So it's not driving down ownership. To your point, from the ownership experience, I think there's some intriguing models potentially where the owner will share in some of the revenue of the vehicle. The Toyota Research Institute last year, in conversations with them, they see 10, 15 years out where the car is no longer a depreciating asset, but an actual profit generating product. Silicon Valley and the automotive retail industry are not communicating.
Are they competing?
Valley, I don't know if they're competing. It's just Silicon Valley is ignoring automotive retail from the perspective that we are that they don't believe dealers are going to be around, and dealers don't know the retail industry doesn't know how to communicate with Silicon Valley. And I think that, frankly, to me, is up to the Coxes, the CDKs, the Reynolds, the IHSs, the Solaris of the world that provide technology services to dealers. I think it's their responsibility to be interacting with the folks at Silicon Valley to make sure the dealers are part of the conversation, part of that process as we move into the connected car era. Because I think that connected car era is going to change, a lot of what we understand in terms of interacting with the customer. Mm-hmm. It may not change all the ownership experience. I mean, it'll evolve some of it, but that's where I'm coming from on the uncertainty.